Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back again, and today we are finally going to be talking about the king and father of emo rap himself, Black Kray. Yeah, that's right. I know many of you thought this day would never come, but it's finally here. Now, Black Kray has been without a doubt the most requested topic that I've ever gotten on this channel before, second only to maybe Little Bo Weep, and I can really understand why. I mean, after all, Black Kray is one of the most influential artists to ever touch the modern underground scene. But despite that, just like many other people from his time, he never seems to get the respect that he deserves. And I know I've said that time and time again when it comes to other artists, but for people like Bones and even Xavier Wolf, they are at least remembered and talked about by the newer generation. However, when it comes to Black Kray, it's really only been in the past couple years that people have finally started to give him his props. And the reasoning behind that is pretty different from your average artist in the underground scene. Because when it comes to people like Bones or Curb Lagoop or Ruben Slick or Space Ghost Perp, they were forgotten for a period of time, but only because the more relevant SoundCloud rappers during 2015 to 2018 were taking the spotlight. Whereas with Black Kray, the main two reasons that he ended up falling into the background for a period of time mostly comes down to the fact that one, he's an inspiration to an inspiration, and two, he's a bit of a loner. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, it's a little bit complicated, but basically the way that the underground often works is that people end up making music that goes on to inspire other artists, and then those artists end up blowing up outside of the underground, and then their fan base goes back to the underground to then discover the artist who inspired them. Whereas with Black Kray, you have 2 degrees of separation. Basically, he went on to blow up within the underground in 2013, his sound of music went on to inspire other artists in the underground, but they themselves never really ended up blowing up like that. However, they would then go on to inspire a third generation of underground artists, and then they blew up. So when tracing down the line of influence, it becomes a little bit more difficult to get back on Kray, because if you're looking at somebody like Cemetery, you probably know that he was inspired by Little Tracy, but then Little Tracy was inspired by Black Kray. Not the best example, but you get what I mean. And on the second point of Black Kray being a loner, while not uncommon in the underground, he doesn't really talk all that much publicly, and on top of that, he was never part of a group that went on to become big in the mainstream, or at least had members that went on to become big in the mainstream. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was part of the group Goth Money Records, and many of the artists within that group would go on to become very influential in their own right, but Black Kray was basically the biggest member of that group, and because of that, he never was really able to fall into the same camp as Space Ghost Perp, because while Perp's career is basically dead in the modern day, he has many rappers that he was associated with back in the day that are carrying his banner now. As much as many of these artists no longer fuck with him, if you ask Denzel Curry who put him on, he's of course gonna say Space Ghost Perp, the same with people like Rob Banks, and because of that, Space Ghost Perp's name continues to live on. Whereas with Black Kray, he never really got that respect until very recently. But with all of that said, enough yapping about his current place in the rap game, we will get to that soon, but before we cover where he is now, we gotta go back in time and cover how exactly he got there. When we cover the story of Black Kray. Yeah, for real. I'm actually covering the story. We're not joking here. For real. Let's get into it. Timothy O'Neill Miles was born February 23rd, 1994 in Richmond, Virginia. Now, some people will say that he was actually born in Ashland, Virginia, which is kind of a misconception. He was technically born in Richmond, spent a couple years there, and then moved to Ashland, where he was primarily raised. He talks a lot about it in this documentary that he made on himself, which has now been deleted because he ended up doxing a bunch of his family members, but there was some good information in it, and if you want to watch it, it has been archived. But anyways, getting back to the point, Kray would spend the first 5 years of his life living in Richmond, Virginia, going between his mom and dad's place. Now, I'm not sure if they were actually divorced or separated. He's never really flat out said that they were, but within that very same documentary, he would talk about going over to his father's house, and considering the fact that most married couples don't live in 2 separate houses, we can probably assume that they were separated. However, despite that, family was never too far away for Kray, because both his mother and father actually lived on the very same street, with his uncle and aunt not living too far away, meaning that he spent a lot of his early days running from house to house, with some of his favorite memories from around the time being family cookouts where his entire extended family tree would all show up and he was able to talk to people that he had never got to know before that point, as well as his father playing a lot of uncensored rap music as well as R&B. And this would of course give Kray Kray a love for hip hop from an early age, with him mostly being drawn to the Hot Boy group, with Lil Wayne being his biggest inspiration. It wasn't really so much the type of music that Lil Wayne was making at the time, and more so the fact that he was really young and was making his way in the rap game, which would inspire Kray to do the same, starting to dress like Wayne when he was only 10 years old. However, these times in Richmond were pretty short-lived, with his entire family relocating to Ashland when he was only 5 years old, which isn't really that far from Richmond, only being 15 minutes away, but the difference between them is night and day, with one of them being a big city and the other one being a small town that only had 7,000 people living there. It's basically the type of place where everybody knows everybody else's business, which to me would be hell on earth, but apparently Black Kray actually enjoyed living there, with him learning how to skateboard at only the age of 10 and spending pretty well all of his time when he wasn't in school, well, skateboarding around. With him spending up to 12 hours a day at the skate park, getting to know different people, and, well, starting to take in the culture, which was a little bit weird for the time, because within Ashland, you had the white neighborhood and the black neighborhood. The white kids would all dress a certain way, and the black kids would all dress a certain way. But Kray never really wanted to keep the status quo, with him always being a little bit of an oddball, with it supposedly running in his family, as his mother would also describe herself as kind of the weirdo in the family. Now, the word weirdo has a bit more of a negative connotation nowadays, but back in the 90s, it basically meant that he was just a little bit different. And different how, you ask? Well, he would dress in skater clothes. Skinny jeans, Vans, band tees, all things that are heavily associated with the 90s. However, at the time, it was mostly only white kids who were wearing that type of stuff. The black kids were dressing completely different, with most of them having more focus on the brand names as well as trying to emulate rappers. And while Black Kray would do that early on in his life, eventually he ended up becoming completely different, with him even going as far to paint his nails black, which was heavily frowned upon at the time as it was seen as gay, which in a southern town probably wasn't as accepted. So basically Black Kray had made a recipe for being an outcast. But despite that, he wasn't one, because he would actually end up meeting a group of friends at the skate park who were just as weird and out there as him, with him going on to meet a longtime friend going by the name of Hundit Mill, who would later go on to rap alongside him in Goth Money Records. However, during this period of time, neither one of them were all that interested in becoming a rapper, as you gotta keep in mind that during the mid-90s to around the mid-2000s, most of the biggest rappers in the game were all street rappers, and seeing as how Black Kray and his friends were already weirdos within their own neighborhood, becoming a rapper didn't seem all that plausible, as after all, if they tried to fake the street image, they would immediately be called out, and if they tried to be themselves, well, people were going to find them weird and not want to listen. So for the time being, they would continue to skate around, with Black Kray eventually creating his own YouTube channel to post his skate videos, which wouldn't get that much attention at the time, but is a pretty cool archive of what exactly he was doing during his childhood. You see, Black Kray is a bit of a weird example of an artist where on one hand, he doesn't really talk all that much and is very mysterious, but on the other, he's done a really good job at archiving absolutely everything he was doing in his early rap career. If you look hard enough and know exactly where you're looking, you can actually find a lot of Black Kray's very early music, something you can't say for many other artists from the time. And while in most cases I really don't fuck with artists who try to be mysterious, I think when it comes to Black Kray, it actually is pretty genuine. I don't think he ever really tried to be mysterious, he just so happened to not talk that much, and because of that, a lot of people became very interested in him. Which is the whole point of being a mysterious artist. You want to be low-key and in the shadows so people want to dig into you more. However, the thing is that only really works when you're a little bit older and you have a lot of lore behind you. If you're 19 years old and trying to be mysterious, well, there's not really that much to dig into. You graduate out of high school and started making music. Truly groundbreaking stuff. But anyways, getting back to Kray, he would eventually start to become interested in making his own music around 2010. All because of one man, which you probably know, going by the name of Lil B, the bass god. Now, while Kanye West kind of kicked open the door for weirdo rappers to make it in the industry, Lil B was the first artist to really show people that anybody could be a rapper. All you had to do was be yourself, have a camera, have a mic, and, well, you could build a platform. And with Black Kray being a heavy user of both MySpace and Tumblr, it was only a matter of time before he came across the bass god. And once he did, his life was changed forever. With him immediately going down a rabbit hole into underground music, not even underground rap, because at the time, while it did exist in different parts of the country, it wasn't really yet a unified thing like it would become in later years. I mean, of course, 3 6 Mafia was doing their thing and they were a pretty heavy influence for Black Kray early on, but at the time, he was more so interested in another genre of music, going by the name of Witch House. Now, it's kind of hard to describe how exactly this genre sounds because it's so experimental and so many different artists within that realm take it in a very different direction. I mean, one artist doesn't sound exactly like the other, which is with every genre of music, but with Witch House, it's very noticeable. So the best thing I could probably do here is show you a couple songs by Witch House artists and let you get a feel for it. Yeah, pretty weird shit, but that's what Black Kray was into at the time, and it would go on to, once again, be a heavy inspiration for the music that he was making. Although during this period of time in 2009 to around 2011, he was more so a based rapper. Now back in the day at the conception of the word, based had a very different meaning than it does now. It wasn't a political thing and it didn't mean to just say whatever you wanted whenever you wanted to.
Well, you know what I think? Who cares what you think? You're a girl now.
It was more about truly being yourself. All throughout human history, there's been people who have tried to hop on whatever is popular or copy what they think is cool, or just overall try to be part of something that feels bigger than themselves. Which personally myself, I don't really think there's any sort of problem with that. It doesn't matter if you get on something late. If you truly enjoy it, don't let anybody stop you from enjoying it. But to be based basically means to be completely yourself, to only really be interested in your own ideas, to stand on your own principles, listen to what other people have to say, but don't be willing to change your opinion so fast, and just being based. At least that's my interpretation of it. And in a way, Black Kray was very based because, well, he wasn't copying trends, he was doing what he thought was cool, and eventually he would become influential because of that. I mean, whenever he was in school, people would always call him a goth kid, even though he never really related to that title, and because of that, while not being bullied or looked down upon, he was always kind of shoved off to the corner. I mean, the goth kids are cool, we can fuck with them, but we don't really want them around all the time. That was kind of the mentality that people had around the time, and you would think because of that, Black Kray would make a lot of really sad, emo music. However, when he first started off, he was making more bass style rap, which once again, kind of confusing to explain, but based music is also a genre of music. I can't really explain what it sounds like. I'll show you a song from it. You probably can listen to it and know what I mean, but trying to explain it would kind of take a little bit of the magic away.
King of rap, I could bet my money on that. Can't face the facts that a young guy killing shit. My new name is Space God, ice cream paint job. Hop up my car, then I drop my roof.
So yeah, you get the point. And after listening to a lot of Lil B, Black Kray decided it was time to start recording his own music. Buying a crappy laptop microphone, getting some sort of unspecified music making software, hitting up 100 Mil and asking him if he wanted to record a song. And of course, he did, with the two of them recording their very first song sometime around 2009. Now, once again, it's kind of confusing to find the very first track that Black Kray ever put out, as after all, he was posting on Tumblr and MySpace and DatPiff. If you look on Genius, they'll tell you that the very first song he ever put out was called Vans On since 2007, with it being released in 2010. However, if you look at other places, they'll tell you that he has music as far back as 2007. And while I don't think that's implausible, I do believe the reason that so many sites think that he was making music in that year is because that one song was called 2007, which is a common misconception when it comes to early underground music. Basically, back in the day, there was a whole vibe to putting out music videos and albums that felt older than they really were, with some examples being Young Lean putting out Ginseng Strip 2002, which of course wasn't released in 2002, and Denzel Curry putting out a tape called Underground Tape 1991 to 1995. The whole point of doing this is because they wanted to wanted it to feel like found footage or some music from a bygone era, but now that it's been 15 years and the music is actually old, it gets very confusing. But yeah, it wasn't released in 2007, it's simply called 2007. Which means that 2010 is probably a pretty good starting point for when he really began to do music. However, if you look on his old YouTube channel, you can actually find an old freestyle that he put out in 2009. So yeah, Black Kray has been making music at least as far back as 2009, maybe even before. With him and 100 Mil going on to create their own rap collective called Terrorist Posse, which included the two of them as well as a couple other people from the area, although they're basically lost to history at this point because the group never went all that far. Now usually when you watch any sort of documentary about Black Kray, they'll say that he was in Raider Klan before he was in Terrorist Posse, but I don't think that's actually the case. I believe Terrorist Posse was started as far back as 2009, and he only ended up joining Raider Klan around 2011. It is possible that he was part of the group before then, as many different articles will say that he actually joined around 2009, which kinda lines up because Black Kray was never really part of the actual musical group, because at the time, Raider Klan was basically only comprised of Space Ghost Perp, his cousins, and Eddie Baker, and Black Kray was not actually part of that group, instead being part of their skate team, which was pretty short-lived. And considering the fact that Black Kray really only started to pop off with the skateboarding clips in 2010, it was probably that year. However, there actually is a video of Space Ghost Perp and Kray skateboarding together in 2011, so it can be either one. And you would think with Black Kray getting connected to Raider Klan so early on that it would be an absolutely massive opportunity for him, but considering the fact that he wasn't really making music all that much at the time and the Klan wasn't fully solidified until around 2013, in the grand scheme of things it really wouldn't help him out all that much, at least not for the time being, although later on that connection to Perp would pay off. But we'll get to that when we get to it. For right now, the year is 2010, and Black Kray was kind of all over the place when it came to posting on YouTube. On one hand, he was posting a bunch of clips of him skateboarding. On the other, he was reposting and archiving a bunch of Lil B's music, with him also posting a music video from Kray Sean, which was called I Just Wanna Be Your Friend, which in a way is really cool because even back in the day, he was kind of interested in archiving this old music and making sure that it was never fully lost to history, and it would end up paying off in a big way because that very same music video would go on to get 1 million views. And for a pretty long period of time, it was actually his most viewed video on the entire channel, with Kray Sean once again being his final inspiration and probably one of the biggest, as after all, he's actually named after her. Black Kray basically means I'm the Black Kray Sean. Now Kray Sean is a whole can of worms on her own. Basically she had this one big hit, ended up getting screwed over by the industry, and then became an underground legend, only to then start doing OnlyFans. But hey, everybody takes a different path in life. I'm not gonna shit on her for that, but all you really need to know is that she was influential and Black Kray had a pretty big crush on her. Although during his very early career, he was actually going under the name of Gucci Kray Goth. Now, I'm not going to keep track of every single name that he's ever had because very similarly to Little Tracy, he has way too many. And the only reason I bring this name up is because I believe it was his very first one, posting the very first music video that's still actively available online by Black Kray, which is called Fucking with Jerry Rice. The song itself is really nothing all that special, but the visuals are pretty cool, and it goes to show that Black Kray was very creative even early on. After that, he would go on to post different vlogs with members of Terrorist Posse, before then posting cooking videos, which is kind of funny. I know a lot of people said on the Xavier Wolf video that he wasn't actually posting cooking videos, instead he was posting videos of him dancing and it was called cooking. I don't know if I believe that or not, but when it comes to Black Kray, there's proof that he was actually cooking a meal. Yeah, the video's right there, you can go watch it if you want. But as the year went on, he would finally start to put his focus completely on music, releasing his first ever mixtape in 2010, which was called Basedaholics. Not really a full-on mixtape, as it was only a compilation of 3 priorly released songs from Tumblr, as at the time from around 2010 to 2013, that was the main place that Black Kray was posting all of his music. And while once again it's nothing all that special, it is pretty cool to look back on to see where exactly he came from.
This is Steve's out, right? This is Steve's out, right? Ride around
tight jeans, steady yelling out.
Although the mixing is very terrible, I'll show you right here.
Steve.
After that, as the year 2010 went on, he would continue to drop music videos on his channels, as well as a bunch of other random shit, before finally locking Tumblr in as his main platform in 2011, with him dropping 4 entire mixtapes during that year. With the first one being called 4 hours and 2 minutes the mixtape, all based freestyles, which for a long time was actually completely lost, with us only having the title and the track list. Although thanks to the help of some of the most dedicated and hardworking people in the entire underground, eventually the music was able to be found. Shout out to all the people making music trackers for their favorite artists, you guys are truly the GOATs. Once again, the project wasn't actually 4 hours long, and as the title implies, it was mostly a bunch of freestyles that were pretty poorly mixed, but either way, at least Black Kray was being consistent. That project was then followed up by another one called Adult Smacks, which was then followed up by another one called Ain't Shit, and then finally Art, Money, and Sluts. Yeah, at the time, Black Kray was pretty vulgar. I'm sure the soccer moms would be freaking out if they saw the titles, but Black Kray wouldn't stop, continuing to drop a bunch of music on his YouTube channel with a bunch of different audios from different artists, as well as his friends, more vlogs, and of course, his own music as well. With 2012 really being the year that he finally started to come into his own, as he would start to make a lot of connections online, with him going on to meet a producer going by the name of Jay Yeah and creating an entire tape with him called Back to Witch House. Now the name Jay Yeah isn't one that people really remember these days, but a lot of people probably know him by his other name, Cold Heart, one of Lil Peep's closest friends and founding member of Goth Boy Clique, which is honestly pretty cool to see because of course this was way before even Thrax House was really a thing and Goth Boy Clique wasn't even an idea yet. On top of that, Goth Money Records hadn't fully solidified at the time, and considering the fact that Cold Heart was actually the very first one to come up with the name Goth Boy Clique in 2011, naming one of his beats after it, it's very possible that he came up with that name all on his own and didn't actually take it from Black Kray. However, Black Kray wouldn't really feel that way as the years went on, but for now, everything was chill. With Kray continuing to drop projects like Selena Gomez Trap House, which sounds like kind of a weird name for a project, and it definitely is, but in a weird way, it was also kinda influential in its own little way. Now I know it's probably annoying for me to point out every little way that Black Kray is influential, but there's a lot of small things that people overlook when it comes to the broader SoundCloud scene that actually come from Black Kray. Because yes guys, I'm gonna find a way to weasel a little pump into this, because when he was really blowing up in 2016, there was a big meme around him that he really wanted to fuck with the girl from iCarly. On top of that, you have Comethazine, who really wanted to fuck with Demi Lovato.
I just wanna fuck Demi, nut on her titties.
And if you go even farther back to around 2014, you have Stitches making his whole song about Miley Cyrus and how bad he wanted to be with her. But the true originator of this entire wave was Black Kray. I'm not really sure if he wants those props for being kind of a creepy, terminally online gooner, but it was mostly a joke, so whatever, we'll give him the props. After that, he would go on to drop a tape on Dat Piff, which was called I Fucked Hoochie Gucci and Taylor Swift, which weirdly enough, he actually put out under the name Little Kim, which is a very popular rapper, but for some reason, he was taking her name. Not really sure why, but once again, in a weird way, kind of influential because, of course, Tracy would go on to become Tracy Minaj, and Ski Mask would have that whole joke about being Beyonce, so maybe Black Kray actually originated that as well. But all of these projects are pretty unimportant in the grand scheme of his career because it wasn't really until he ended up putting out the project Cocaine and Ice Cream that he truly started to gain a fan base in the underground. Because like I said before, all of the prior music that he put out was horribly mixed, and while he would eventually start to move away from bass music into more emo rap, he didn't really hit his stride until this project. But let me tell you, once he did, things would really start to take off for him, because he would get a feature on that very same project from Chris Travis on the track Wavy Like Africa, and while Chris wasn't massive at the time, he was definitely a lot bigger than Kray. On top of that, Black Kray would go on to get a feature on the track 80 Dime Bags featuring Chris Travis and Xavier Wolf, which would appear on Chris Chris Travis's first official mixtape, which was called Codeine and Pizza. Like Kray, he had other mixtapes before that, but this was really the one that broke him through. Once again, another win for Chris Travis, maybe one of the most influential artists in the entire underground, despite the fact that nobody really gives him those props. But in the past 3 videos that I've done, he's appeared time and time again. After that, he would go on to release a massive compilation project with a bunch of his priorly released music from Tumblr, which was called Twerking 10 Cell Phones. I don't know why that's so hard to say, but I said it. Before then dropping another project that very same year called Trap Art, meaning he had like 10 projects at this point. He was definitely putting in a lot of work. Although the real moment that his career would finally start to take off is when he made the connection to Marcy Main. Now in the modern day, Marcy Main is pretty forgotten, although he definitely is a pretty important figure in the underground, being one of the co-founders of Goth Money Records, really helping to put it together in a way that none of the other members were able to at the time, and just overall being a pretty good rapper. At the time, Marcy was actually in art school and really only doing music as a side thing, but after getting connected to Kray and seeing the potential that he had, he was willing to go all in, with the two of them going on to drop a tape called Black Art Goons, as I believe Marcy actually had his own collective that went by that name, or it might have just been Goon. I'm not really sure. They talk about it a little bit in the No Jumper interview, but it's not clear what the exact name was. And when he uses the word goon, he's not talking about the Ruben Slick version of goon. We're talking about like goon, you know, like an underling, somebody who's part of a gang, I guess. And it was through Marcy Main that Black Kray was able to meet other members who would eventually become part of Goth Money Records, known as Lucky Lean, as well as Karma. Now, Karma actually lived in Virginia as well, although I don't believe the two of them actually met in real life prior to meeting online, but it is possible that they were friends, but there's no real public information about it. With all of these members going on to appear on Kray's next tape, which was called Crack Clouds Over Art Kitchen, which is a very underrated project in his overall discography. I feel like if Cocaine and Ice Cream was a proof of concept, this was really the project where he was fully into his sound and felt comfortable making it, which of course was emo rap basically, although a very early version of it. On top of that, this project also had a feature from Chris Travis and Xavier Wolf on Alicia Keys' remix, which went on to get a lot of plays on both Tumblr as well as MySpace or wherever the fuck it was posted. On top of that, he also ended up putting out a music video on his personal YouTube channel, which was called Broken Designer, going on to get 30k views in only a couple weeks, which for the time was pretty big for Black Kray. And you would think with him forming all these high profile connections with artists online and doing pretty well number wise on a bunch of different platforms, he'd probably be making a pretty comfortable amount of money. But in the early days of the internet, it was pretty hard to make a buck. The best options you had was trying to sell an album on Bandcamp, which Black Kray didn't have at the time, or iTunes, which once again, Black Kray didn't have at the time. And in fact, he actually ended up getting in trouble with the police after getting a speeding ticket, and his mother told him that she wasn't going to pay it, and that if he wanted to pay it off, he'd have to get a real job. Yeah, that's right. During the time that Black Kray was really starting to take off, he was actually working at McDonald's, with him spending 6 months there before then going on to work a couple other manual labor jobs, although he's never really specified what they are, and honestly, who cares? And on top of clocking in every day and having to work a terrible job, Terrorist Posse was also starting to fall apart, as after all, basically all of the members had graduated in 2012, and after that summer was over, they all started to go their own way. It's a fun idea to be part of a rap group when you're in high school, but as you get older and get more responsibilities, it's only natural that you're gonna want to go do your own thing and start to make a real paycheck. And to make matters even worse, 100 Mil would actually get a girl pregnant, meaning he no longer had all that much time to make music with Kray. And you would think because of all of that, Kray would be pretty deflated and no longer want to make music, but well, at the time, it was really his only passion, and he even had plans to move to LA with Marcy Main to try to do it full time. An absolutely insane thing to do at the time, as after all, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to make money off of rap at the time, unless you were signed to a label, which wasn't going to happen for Kray, considering the fact that he was so different and weird and way too ahead of his time for the industry to accept. Kray didn't care about any of that, because he had plans to create his very own label. One day when he was on the bus on the way to work, he would start to think about Cash Money Records, eventually thinking of the title that people had given him all through high school, being Goth, and combining the two. I mean, it's not the most creative thing in the world, but it got the point across, and it showed that Black Kray was finally willing to embrace the title that people have put upon him, with him hitting up Marcy Main soon after that and pitching the idea to him. And of course, Marcy loved it, with Kray immediately moving to LA to live with him and the rest of the Goth Money Collective forming soon after that, which of course was Karma, Marcy Main, Black Kray, Lucky Lean, 100 Mil, which I have no idea how Black Kray convinced him to move to LA with absolutely no promise of money when he had a child, but somehow he managed to do it. And then finally, Kane Groceries, who ended up joining a little bit later on. Now there is a little bit of controversy of who the true founder of Goth Money Records is, with many people citing Kray, and that mostly being the truth, as he's the one who came up with the name and mostly got the group together, but Marcy Main also having a massive hand in creating it. Basically, Kray was the idea guy and Marcy Main was the one who actually ended up putting it together. He was a little bit older, he knew how money worked, and he was the one who ended up creating that initial Bandcamp. And as time went on and the group got bigger, he was also the one that would primarily create the merch and basically the only one that was really promoting it. However, all of this wouldn't really come to a head until later on, because right now the group was new, everybody was excited, and honestly there wasn't a better time for them to really be all together. Because only a few months prior to Black Kray landing in LA, another very prominent artist in the underground going by the name of Young Lean would drop his breakthrough single, which was called Ginseng Script 2002. And while at the time many people in the mainstream saw Young Lean and everybody associated with him as nothing more than a joke, when it came to people who were actually tapped into the underground, they loved it and they wanted more. And Black Kray was really in the perfect spot to capitalize on it, with him and 100 Mil going on to drop their breakthrough song, which was called Depressed Oceans. I'll give you a listen right here.
Oh my gosh, shit.
With the song going on to run up 100,000 plays on YouTube alone, and probably way more on all the other platforms it was dropped on, as well as catching the attention of Young Lean, who would start fucking with Black Kray in late 2013. And once Kray got his first real kickstart within the underground scene, he wouldn't stop, with him and Marcy Main going on to drop a collaboration project called Zoloft, before then dropping his follow-up to Ice Cream and Cocaine called Ice Cream and Mac 10s, with him then going on to drop a music video for his track 100 Round Clip Kray Sean, which even to this day is one of his biggest music videos that he ever dropped, the biggest one on his personal channel and the second biggest altogether. And you can even see Young Lean commenting on the music video, showing that the two of them were going to start to work together in the very near future. However, probably the most important connection that he made in 2013 was with a female artist going by the name of Booty Chain, who's very influential in her own way. Have I been saying influential too many times in this video? Probably, but well, she is. And while nowadays people pretty well only know her as being Black Kray's girlfriend, during those early days in 2013, she was actually making a lot of really unique and weird music, with some people even citing her as being the original creator of the tread style. I mean, I'm not making that claim, but people have, and because of that, she was a pretty important character in the underground. And with the entire world of the emo, rap, underground scene being so small at the time, it was only a matter of time before her and Kray crossed paths. And once they did, according to them, it was basically love at first sight, with them both having a very weird and off-putting vibe. And despite the fact they didn't even talk to each other at the time, there was an unspoken connection that was formed that very same day. And Black Kray was able to get his chance to connect to her in a more meaningful way not long after that, because she ended up leaving her laptop on the bus and he would bring it back to her. Truly romantic shit. And while people try to clown on this relationship as seeming childish, the two of them have been together for the better part of 15 years, and I've never seen two people who have been able to match each other's vibes in this type of way, so honestly, no hate towards them. W Kray for staying in a long-term relationship, and even if you don't fuck with that, at least we know that Kray will never be caught in some fucked up allegations. Long-term relationship, he's not fucking with any young girls, and once again, another W. However, even though things were going semi-well for him, he was still really broke, with him mostly living off of food stamps at the time, and even having to cancel his phone bill because it was combined with his mom and he was wasting way too much money. He would end up getting his own phone plan, but at the time he couldn't afford to have an iPhone, so he had no choice but to downgrade to a flip phone. And little did he know by that simple act he was about to influence over 10 years of music, because every time you hear Lil Peep or Lil Tracy or really anybody from the underground rapping about a flip phone, Black Kray was the first one to do it. It's all those little things with Kray. It's all the things that you would never think of. But yeah, when you look back, it's kind of like Soulja Boy. He was the first to do that. He was the first to do that. And while he didn't create emo rap, he definitely created a lot of the staples that people still run with nowadays. And as 2013 came to a close and 2014 began, he finally got the opportunity to start making some real money, as Xavier Wolf would tell him to get on SoundCloud, as there was a lot of money to make, and before long, he was able to get into the partner program, dropping all of his old projects on there before then dropping his most recent tape, which was called Goth Love. And honestly, in the entirety of Black Kray's discography, I don't think there's a project that's more important than this one, with two of his all-time biggest tracks in the underground coming from this mixtape, with the first one of course being 30 Round Clip Kray Sean, which was priorly released but got even bigger once it was posted on SoundCloud, and the even bigger of the two called 7 Tears, 7 Doves, 7 Blunts, one of his most legendary songs, and honestly, sounds like it came out in 2018, not 2014.
Watch her cry, watch her cry, while I stop.
It was also around the same time that the entire Goth Money Collective would go on to do a bunch of small shows all over Virginia as well as LA, where they would sell a bunch of merch and start to make enough money to live at least a little bit comfortably. After that, he would go on to drop another music video for the track Champagne Tears, which funnily enough, Xavier Wolf actually commented on pretty recently. Apparently Xavier Wolf is Black Kray's biggest fan, which is a cool connection. I mean, they worked together early on, but Xavier Wolf is still Xavier Wolf. I find it really interesting that every time I drop a documentary that has even a hint of allegations, even if I don't go into them or co-sign them, all of a sudden the entire comment section is, "You get everything wrong, all of the details are wrong." Pretty interesting. Weird how that happens. It's almost like people in the underground can't accept that their favorite rapper might be a terrible person, but Black Kray isn't a terrible person, so let's get back on track and I'll let you know what he was doing in the rest of 2014. Because very similarly to Xavier Wolf, 2014 to 2015 were really the peak years for Black Kray, as he ended up going on tour with Young Lean on their first ever Sad Boy tour. He also ended up performing on V-Files alongside him, and during this period of time, Young Lean was absolutely massive, even getting features with Travis Scott before he really blew up. And while Black Kray definitely was big within LA and Virginia, he was nowhere near the level of Young Lean. However, unfortunately in late 2014, one of Young Lean's closest friends ended up passing away, and the entire collective would take a bit of a step back from music for the following year. However, they had managed to give Black Kray enough hype for him to continue his movement, and throughout the rest of 2014, he would make some pretty big connections. Although, unfortunately, before he got the chance, Black Kray would actually die. Well, at least the persona Black Kray would die, because he started to go under the name of Sick Boy Rari, basically meaning that he was sick in the head and that he was like a Rari because he was always in his own lane. Now, I think the real reason that he wanted to change his name is because he wanted to differentiate himself from Kray Sean. I mean, he was a big fan of her, but at this point he was so established within the underground that he probably didn't want anybody to think he was a clone of her or part of her group. However, even 11 years later, people still call him Black Kray. That's more so the name that he's known for, and he'll often switch between the two. So honestly, I'm going to continue to call him Black Kray, but if you know him as Sick Boy Rari, well, that's fine. After that, he would go on to drop a music video for the track Red Tear Drop Goth Crip, which was the very first track that he used the Sick Boy Rari name with. After that, he would go on to put out another music video, which was for his track Prada Bow, produced by Horsehead, another founding member of Goth Boy Click, going to show that the connection was definitely there even early on. Before him and Booty Chain would then go on to drop a track together called Duh Job, produced by Filthy, which if you don't know Filthy, he's one of the most legendary producers in the entire underground. I know I've been saying it over and over again, but he's produced for Drake, Playboi Carti, a bunch of really important people. And well, he kind of got his start working with people like Chapo and Black Kray. So once again, influential. Okay, I've said it enough times, you get it, Black Kray's influential. Let's keep it moving. Soon after that, Black Kray would go on to drop a project called 700 100 Degrees, which had a feature from Blade, officially closing off the year of 2014. Now, if 2014 was the year that Black Kray was really putting out his best work, 2015 was the year that him and his group finally started to get a little bit of credit, with him going on to drop a collaboration project with an artist called Blizzed Out that February, followed up by a solo project called Thug Angel, which once again is one of his most fondly remembered projects and where a lot of his new fans really got onto him. I mean new fans in terms of SoundCloud people. He also has new fans who got on him with TikTok, but right now I'm talking about SoundCloud people. That was followed up by Still Struggling, Still Shining, and then Shitty Sick Boy, which was produced by Filthy. And on top of all of those projects, the entire Goth Money Collective was dropping non-stop music videos on Kray's personal channel all throughout 2015. I can't possibly name them all, but there's a lot to listen to if you like Kray's music. Not to mention the entire group was dropping a bunch of mixtapes from 2013 to 2015, with the final one being known as Trillionaires, which they would call their first official studio album, although I don't believe it was actually released through a major label. The label behind it is called Break World Records, which only has one credit, and it's this project. So either it was some sort of imprint from a bigger label, or it was a random underground label that they happened to get connected to. But either way, it was actually this very project that would finally start to gain them attention from the legacy hip-hop media, with them getting an article on Vice, which was a pretty big deal for 2015. On top of that, both Kray and the group as a whole would go on to get interviews on No Jumper. Once again, it wasn't a big media platform at the time, but of course, as No Jumper grew and grew, Black Kray would gain more and more attention from that interview, as many people wanted to dig into his past and find out where exactly he came from, which I mean, I'm talking about me, but either way, yeah, the interview went pretty well, and they would actually talk a little bit about how they had beef with an underground producer going by the name of Icy Chwat. This was apparently because they thought Icy Chwat had copied their friend Avi Chwat. I don't know a whole lot about him, but apparently he was around Chapo and some other big people back in the day. Apparently Icy Chwat was actually a really big fan of Goth Money Records, and then he started biting them. He ended up joining this group called Divine Council, and then both groups would start beefing in 2015, although it wouldn't really go anywhere, and I believe nowadays they are probably on good terms considering the fact that it's been like 10 years, but who knows, maybe they still hate each other. Honestly though, this was mostly between Marcy Main and Icy Chwat, whereas Black Kray kept more quiet and never really openly spoke about beef, at least not until the following year, because very similarly to Xavier Wolf, once 2015 began to wrap up, Black Kray would notice that a bunch of rappers were starting to blow up off of SoundCloud, and while he wasn't all that overly attached to the app in the same way that Xavier was, in fact by late 2015 Black Kray was getting ready to completely abandon it and instead start working with Marcy Main's website, which was called Sound Chef or something. It never really got off the ground, but for a minute they were definitely trying to push it. However, the one thing that Black Kray was protective over was his style. I'm not really even talking about his musical style, more so the way that he dressed, the way that he carried himself, and of course what he called himself, Goth. Which makes a lot of sense. If you spend your entire life being bullied for being a goth kid, seeing other people do it and then get popular for it probably feels pretty bad, but during this time Black Kray wouldn't speak too much on it. He would see Famous Dex blow up, that wasn't really a big deal, it had nothing to do with what he was doing. Then he would see Lil Uzi blow up and he was wearing chokers and rocking with the whole underground emo aesthetic while not really making that music, and then Trippie Redd came and it was a similar story, and by the time he saw people like Little Tracy and Little Peep, he was starting to feel a little bit disrespected. But either way, he would keep his mouth shut for the time being, finishing off the year of 2015 by appearing alongside Space Ghost Perp, Thousand Band Fawny, and a bunch of other people on the Terror Gang freestyle, which unfortunately has been deleted but was re-uploaded, so luckily not lost to history. Funnily enough, Black Kray is one of the few people that Space Ghost Perp never fell out with, at least during the 2010s. I think nowadays they definitely are, which I'll get to a little bit later on, but for the most part, they were chill. And honestly at the time, I don't think anybody really expected Kray to speak up all that much, with him simply putting out music and letting it speak for him. Putting out a couple more projects that very same year called Soulja Love Rari World, Nightmare on Elm Street, Working Out of the Mud, and Sad Boys, as well as landing a feature on Young Lean's project Warlord on the track Pearl Fountain. Yeah, a lot to cover, but all very important. But on top of all of the music that he was putting out at the time, probably the most important thing he did that year was meet Little Tracy. Now, these two artists have a very complicated relationship, and by looking at them, they're very similar in a lot of ways. Because while on most occasions I don't really care about people taking influence from other artists, when it comes to Tracy and Black Kray, it's pretty uncanny. I mean, both of them come from Virginia, both of them wear bucket hats all the time, they both make emo rap, talk about flip phones and being a vampire. And while that's pretty par for the course at the time, if you consider the fact that Little Tracy was a big fan of Kray back in 2013, before he really started to come into his own as Tracy, it's pretty obvious that, yeah, he did steal Black Kray's entire persona. And while that had to be pretty weird for Kray at the time, at least Tracy was willing to pay homage, and because of that, they remained on pretty good terms until later in the year. Because with the introduction of Lil Peep into Goth Boy Clique, things were really starting to take off, and at this point, Kray couldn't help but feel like he was being disrespected. People were calling Peep, Tracy, and the entire group the future emo rap. Meanwhile, him and Goth Money Records were left behind. And so, he ended up doing something that nobody would have expected, which was put out a diss track called Banned for Life. And not only was this a diss track on Lil Peep, Little Tracy, and Goth Boy Clique, but also many other members of the underground. He would say that Lil Peep needed to give him his style back. He would say that Little Tracy had gone too far and needed to go back to Virginia. He would call out Agoff and say that he was a tweaker. And he would even call out No Jumper, Mascarilla, and Lil Uzi Vert, calling him a fake punk. And you would think with him taking shots at so many influential people within the rap game that he would be completely blackballed. This would be a Space Ghost Perp moment, the moment of no return. But considering the fact that Black Kray never really worked with a whole lot of artists in the first place, it didn't do much. Tracy and Peep would never end up responding to it, and it's not totally confirmed that him and Peep were on good terms when he passed away, but for the most part, I don't think Kray had any personal beef with Peep and really only wanted to take shots at Tracy. And while the two of them weren't on the best terms throughout 2016 and 2017, by 2018, they had finally made up, which is kind of interesting considering the fact that Tracy was crashing out so hard after Peep passed away, yet was willing to make up with Kray, which goes to show how much he respects Kray and really looks up to him as an influence. If it was anybody else, he would have completely crashed out, but considering the fact that it's basically his hero, well, they made up. And as 2016 came to an end and 2017 began, things would get quite a bit slower for Kray, with him only putting out 2 projects that year, called 4,000 Degrees and Weeping in the Trenches, with him mostly spending the entire year performing at different venues and getting prepared to go on a full-on tour the very next year. He also got an interview on Ham on Everything, which was pretty cool, and then in the following year, 2018, he would get 2 different videos on World Star Hip Hop, which was pretty surprising to see and would give him a little bit more attention, but for the most part, Black Kray was really only looked at as a very respected member of the early underground, and wasn't really generally listened to by the grander SoundCloud scene, although that wouldn't really matter for very much longer, as it would end up dying off only a year later. However, unfortunately, it was also around this time from 2018 to 2019 that Goth Money Records would kind of fall apart. I mean, most of the members were still fucking with it, and it hadn't really been an overly active collective since around 2015, but in 2019, it would start to break up. With Marcy Main, a longtime member and partial co-founder of the group, going on to leave, there's a couple different reasons behind this, although it's really a lot of speculation. Basically, Kray ended up going on this European tour with Booty Chain, and apparently Marcy Main was offended that he didn't take him along. On top of that, there's also rumors that King Groceries actually ended up robbing Marcy Main, and when he came to Kray about it, he didn't give a fuck. Once again, I wouldn't look too deeply into the validity of all of this, because after all, it's really only Marcy Main talking about it, and Black Kray never really speaks on any of this sort of stuff. I'm not saying I don't believe Marcy Main, all I'm saying is that there's 2 sides to every story, but Marcy, if you end up seeing this video and you happen to want to do an interview or get your story out there, I'm more than willing to give you a platform, whether it's an interview or just hitting me up and telling me what happened, and then I can do a video on it. Either way, if you want to do that, cool. If not, that's cool too. Look at Twisted begging for interviews again. Look at Anyways, moving on. Soon after that European tour came to an end, Black Kray and Booty Chain would appear on an interview together to talk about how they met and their come up and the current state of the underground, with the two of them feeling pretty optimistic that it was going in a better direction and 2020 was going to be a completely different year for the underground as a whole, which it definitely was, but probably not the way they expect it. Also, Black Kray would be the sole feature on City Morgue Volume 1. I didn't really know where to fit that in, but it feels kind of important to mention. But with that said, we have finally reached 2020, and as all of you know, by the time that I get to this part in history, I usually have the same thing to say. The entire underground would flip on its head, all of the rappers who weren't that popular would start to get their shine, but for Black Kray, that wasn't really the case. I mean, he had a fan base, don't get me wrong, people were definitely fucking with him, but besides that cult status, he wasn't really breaking all that far outside of it. And you would think with him being unable to do shows during the year of 2020 that his career would take a pretty big hit, although considering the fact that Black Kray is really a homebody anyways and he doesn't do all that many shows, it didn't make that big of a difference. No, the real big breakthrough moment for Black Kray in the modern day would come in 2023 when he ended up appearing on the Lyrical Lemonade album All Is Yellow, which overall is a pretty shit album. I mean, it has a lot of cool features and a lot of good artists, but overall it's just very bland. But the absolute highlight of the entire project was definitely Hello There by Corbin, Black Kray, and even Little Tracy. Yeah, what a weird turn of events. The person who had basically stolen Kray's entire style was now helping him to get that mainstream attention that he always deserved. You know, Tracy, you're definitely a very odd guy, but honestly, W Tracy for that, because after this, Black Kray would really start to take off. It would gain him a lot of attention as an artist from the newer generation, with him going on to do a podcast with Neopunk before then landing a Montreality interview the next year, which honestly should have happened about 10 years ago, but either way, cool to see it happen. At the same time, he would also get a feature with Cemetery, which I know a lot of people like to clown on Cemetery, but honestly, he does do a pretty good job at bridging the gap between the older generation and the newer one, because there's not many people like him in the modern day underground. Is he kind of a douchebag? Yeah. Is he kind of fucked up with other members of the group? Yes, but hopefully Cemetery's starting to grow as a person, and it's cool for him to give Black Kray a cosign or Kray to give him a cosign. Either way, it's mutually beneficial, and both of them would gain a lot off of that. On top of that, Kray would then go on to perform at Summer Smash in 2024, which is completely insane. I don't think anybody would have ever expected he would have made it there, but he did, so once again, W Kray. And on top of that, he would even get one of his tracks finally trending on TikTok, which was called Princess Cuts My Wrist. Now, I don't know if I can show the cover of this because it's kind of edgy, but it seems like the new generation really fucks with it. And while of course longtime fans are bitching and whining and crying that all these new gens now know about Black Kray, I think honestly he really deserves it. I mean, talk about an artist who's kept it real for an entire decade. He's always been consistent, he's never tried to sell out to get in the industry, and while of course there is a little bit of drama circulating him with the whole breakup of Goth Money Records and of course the beef with Lil Peep, but for the most part, considering how long he's been an artist, there's very little controversy around him. And considering the fact that we have an absolute megaton of classic songs from him and more on the way, I really don't think we have to worry about him watering down his style to appeal to the mainstream. If he was gonna do that, he would have done it during like 2017, but he never did. He always stayed true to himself. He's very humble. He seems like a nice guy, and honestly, just a cool fucking artist. It's not very often that I do a video on somebody and I feel so positively by the time that I'm done, because most times they either say something kind of fucked up in an interview, or they come off as douchey, or they're drug addicted, or they scam somebody, or they beat somebody, or they did some fucked up shit with a kid. I mean, that's the underground for you. But Black Kray is really that guy. And honestly, I'm really glad that I could finally give him his spotlight. It took a long time to do because I really wanted to make it respectful and dig deep into all of his lore and give you guys something for the ages. And while I'm not sure if I fully accomplished that goal, I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. And with that said, shout out to Black Kray. And honestly, I hope his career continues to thrive. But with that said, I feel kind of empty. I mean, it's been almost like 7 months since people started asking for Black Kray videos. It's been a running joke on the channel. And now that I've done it, where do I go from here? Well, that's up for you guys to decide. Let me know who you want to see next if you made it it to the end of the video, leave a burger emoji. Sorry it was so long, but honestly, Kray deserves it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're trying to get to 32K. And with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye. Real quick before we end off the video, just want to give a big shout out to my patrons, or rather Patreon, being Liam Campbell. Thank you so much for supporting the channel for so many months without many benefits on there. But we are upgrading the Patreon, so if you want to get your name set at the end of these videos and you want to get videos a day early, make sure to head over there and, well, become a member.